The penultimate episode of Industry Season 4 has been released, and this ever so slightly longer than usual episode was essentially the amalgamation of Henry being betrayed by everybody that he trusted in the most recent part of his life, his uncle, his wife, and also Whitney. As well as that, he was framed by Whitney, which connected to why Henry's demise was occurring in the exact way that it was. That opening scene, which pretty much cemented the end of Henry and Yaz, was an argument that also felt so different to the powerful one in episode 2, and with her now going against him. It showed that after all of her warnings, she'd reached her limit. So with that, let's take a look at the episode, discuss the ending, and what it means for the finale. Here is Industry Season 4 Episode 7 Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. Yaz. Yasmin was the character that was at the heart of the episode, as it felt like she was single-handedly orchestrating the demise of Tender, which meant that she was targeting her husband and allowing him to take responsibility for the downfall of the company. Doing that whilst even knowing that legacy was the very thing that Henry cared about. We saw an argument breaking out between the both of them in the opening scene, and Henry was blaming Yaz for getting him to get on board with Tender, making out like he didn't have free will. The threat that Henry was facing from Whitney essentially implied that declaring ignorance to the situation wouldn't free him up from the jail time that he could be facing, even though he didn't actually know about the lies that were at Tender's core. When Henry lashed out at Yaz, we saw a look in her eye which was of genuine fear, and I feel like in that moment she knew that she no longer wanted to be with him. There was no going back from the way that he was speaking with her, and with Henry not holding on to any form of responsibility at all. Following the argument, he was intimate with Yaz, where she was just frozen, and I feel like that was then when her mind was made up on what she needed and wanted to do. This then began the dismantling of Tender from a media perspective, with their connection to government, the Secretary of State specifically, and also with Henry being the face of it. It seems like the article is going to be an attack on Henry's character and the fact that he's failed once again. Yasmin supposedly loves Henry, and even though she's married to him, she's the most alone that she's ever been. This was something that was present in the conversation that presented itself between herself and Harper during the ending. The fact that they've reconciled and found some common ground again right when the both of them are at their lowest and openly feeling alone felt appropriate. The conversation that Yaz and Harper had, where they said that they'd look out for each other that evening, showed that they were mirror images of each other in that specific moment. Yaz was sick of Henry acting like a child, and as we saw when she was speaking with Alexander, he didn't know if the targeting of Henry's character was the right thing for them to do. He also didn't know if what they were doing was out of love because he was getting out of control, or if the very headline and brandishing him across the papers would quite literally be the death of him. After all, Henry was caring more about the press release and how he'd come across rather than ending up with nothing at all and losing his home. So this new article could quite literally be the death of him. I find it quite harrowing because it seems like he could end up following in his father's footsteps if it all goes wrong, and I think that would mark such a bleak ending for the character. Yaz has now made her bed, and it doesn't have Henry in it. However, with Henry quite literally being left hung out to dry by Whitney, he's gonna need some form of support, so I'm intrigued to see if he's gonna get it from her or not. Henry and Whitney. If there was a moment or a piece of dialogue in the show that perfectly summed up Henry, it was when Whitney said to him, "Do you know why you can't regulate your emotions? It's because you're an effing child." The way that he was acting with Yaz during the beginning of the episode was exactly how he was acting in front of Whitney when they were on the plane, and like Yaz, when she thought that Henry had no right to speak to her like that, Whitney thought the same. As frustrating as Henry is, I do feel a little bit bad for him because he was sold up the river by Whitney during the beginning of the season, and at one point it felt like he had good intentions with the role that he took at the company. But here he now was, backed into a corner and being forced to participate in the crimes that Tender was carrying out. Tender were planning on doing a hostile takeover of Pierre Point, and even though it was something that wasn't feasible due to everything that they had essentially being imaginary, Henry was having to head up the process. It was at the end of the episode where he found out that Tender were going to be investigated, where once he was back in the UK, he found out that Yaz had resigned from her position in the company. She wasn't at home. And then, when he went into the office to find Whitney because he hadn't heard from him since they landed, when he phoned him, he heard it ringing in his drawer, showing that Whitney had finally been able to go on the run and abandon the sinking ship that he was being forced to captain. Henry is now well and truly on his own, and with Tender beginning to collapse around him, with it actually being predicted that when the stock market opens, the price is going to be down 77%. A storm is now coming for Henry as he's the sole CEO of the company, and it was going to be a difficult storm to navigate through. Henry cares about what people think of him, and with a barrage of abuse and investigations coming his way over the fact that he's going to be on another venture and essentially have failed, it could be extremely damaging, as now he'll have nobody to fall back on. With Whitney, the moment that I found most interesting in this episode was when he had his passport with him and he was going to do a runner. As he left his hotel room, we saw the hitman that took out Jim a few episodes back leading Whitney into a car, and when he was in there, he was basically told that if he tried to leave, then he'd be killed. Whitney was the person that needed to live with the consequences that were coming his way from the fallout of Tender. I don't know about you, but I kinda got the impression that Whitney was actually being forced into this role and that there were people above him almost like the puppet masters forcing him to do this and act the way that he is. Did he truly believe in everything that he was doing, or was he himself just being manipulated from above? Whitney's phone was actually the giveaway to the fact that he was planning on escaping because he was tracked at the airport, so that's why his phone was left in Tender HQ during the ending, because that way he would have been untraceable. There was a moment in the episode where Henry said to Whitney, "Do you ever let go of that crutch?" when referring to his phone, and Whitney implied that if he didn't have it with him, then he was most probably dead. So would Whitney have willingly left his phone? Is he dead? Or is the character that he's being forced to play by those above him as Whitney now dead, and he's gone into hiding and done a runner to somewhere else? It's interesting because he's left Henry the weight of Tender's collapse, but with him being threatened with severe punishment if he tried to escape and the hitman being sat there right alongside him as a threat, he's gone bold by trying to leave. The show does like to write characters out of the show in strange, non-explosive ways. Take Jim, Rishi, and Derek in this season. None of them really felt explosive on screen. They just kind of have their moment. It's dramatic, don't get me wrong, but then they go. So that might just be the case with Whitney. My review of the episode. I thought this was a really strong episode of Industry. Week after week, this show has just gotten better and better, and it's continuing to improve even as we build towards the finale, which is a great sign for the direction that the show could go in. One of the standout scenes for me in this episode was the argument with Yaz and Henry during the beginning. It felt so intense, and the anger that Henry had with the fact that he was taking it out on Yaz was something that I actually found quite uncomfortable to watch. The sheer shock that was even in her eyes as he was yelling at her took her back, and I loved how it just solidified her changing sides and being prepared to hit Henry where it hurt because he was beyond the point of saving in any other way. He's been loved and nurtured his whole life, and it's ultimately led him to be this spoilt, entitled man, so she wanted to do something different. The twist with Whitney trying to escape was a great move, and I didn't expect the hitman to be standing outside of the door. The shot of him being left alone in the car park made him look so fragile, vulnerable, and like he was out of options. He was essentially trapped in a prison the size of the world because there was always eyes on him. I do think Whitney has been so well performed during this season of the show. He truly felt like an evil man, and whilst I don't quite know how much he's being controlled in terms of his personality, the cruelness and the manipulative nature that he has really does cut through the screen. Yaz is the character that I feel really stole this episode though. Seeing her reach breaking point in her relationship and then beginning to orchestrate Tender's demise even more than what Harper was a great twist. Harper had essentially failed because Tender's stock was beginning to recover. Seeing the power that she had, but also that loneliness at the core and the way that it was mirrored with Harper provided a real human and emotional moment at the end of the episode. Both of them just wanted to be 17 again, a time where there were less responsibilities, less pressure, and more fun. So it showed just how caught up in the world the both of them were in the present day. Kit Harington also did a phenomenal job with Henry in this episode. The level of conviction with the panic, lack of awareness with what's going on, and the 0 to 100 stress level is something that's performed so well. Like I said, I do feel a bit bad for him because he never wanted to be in this situation because he thought Tender was an above-board company. But now, in being caught up in it all, we're seeing his world come collapsing down all over again. The score and song choices in this episode were also really strong. It started and ended with Daft Punk and then also having Heroes playing under Whitney's speech at the presentation, connecting to the fact that he was delivering an inspiring speech was a nice touch. I also thought the underlying score, with it playing under quite a lot of the scenes, adding to the tension that was building, allowed that uncomfortable backdrop to be present throughout what we were watching. With only one episode to go until season 4 concludes, I am intrigued to see where it's going to go and who's going to end up taking the rap for Tender's claps and wrongdoings. So, there you have it, Industry Season 4 Episode 7 Ending Explained. If you want to see more videos on Industry Season 4, then check the playlist below, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future videos. What did you think of this episode? Share your thoughts in the comments. As always, thanks for tuning into the video, and I'll see you in the next one.